Well, we're continuing with our discussion, huh, Steve? With our discussion of the HeartSutra. I'm going to review a little bit, just in case you forgot anything that I was saying last week. It may be that the HeartSutra, like all these other texts that we study, is very simple. But so you have to just keep repeating the same point over and over again. It may be that there's only one point, and the problem is just that we keep forgetting. So, on that theory, I'll review a little bit. Last time we talked about the title, Maha Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. And in talking about the title, we necessarily got into the idea of emptiness, which is, of course, the main thing that the HeartSutra is talking about, because the word emptiness is already implied in the first word of the title of the sutra, Maha, great, Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. And the word Maha has a kind of esoteric and exoteric meaning. It means the same thing as it means, in English, great, wonderful, superior, supreme, terrific, we love you. But it also has this sort of esoteric meaning of without bounds, so great that it's nothing could surpass it. It's all inclusive, literally without any boundaries. So if something doesn't have any boundaries, then it's inseparable from anything else. It's inseparable from anything. So if it's not separable from anything, it's not a separate thing. It's not a literal thing. It's almost like nothing, because it doesn't have any edges. Because only that which can be separated can be something. Right? That's what something is. It's something because it's not something else. Right?
Right.
If it's also something else, then it's not really anything by itself. So to say that something without boundaries is anything is really to kind of misunderstand what something is to begin with. So Maha implies that it isn't a thing. So then you might say, well, it's a process. But that's not right either, because if we say something's a process, then we're saying it's a process, and it's not this other process, it's this process. But then the same problem applies. So it's not a thing, and it's not a process. So already with the word Maha, it's already very much, we get into the same sorts of paradoxes and understandings that we get into when we talk about emptiness. The prajna, remember, is the faculty that cognizes this emptiness. So, prajna is from the side of the subject prajnas the emptiness. So emptiness is like the object that the subject is prajna-ing. But we just established that emptiness is not an object, that it's not a thing. So emptiness is, in a sense, a term. It's just a word that sort of stands on the side of the object, and prajna is a word, a term, that stands on the side of the subject. The etymology of the word shunyata, which is the word in Sanskrit for emptiness, has to do with something that's probably very large but empty inside, like a big balloon, which you look at it and you think, wow, that's a big thing, there must be a lot of stuff inside there, but there's nothing inside of it. Something that looks to be very weighty and substantial, but actually, in truth, it's light as a feather. That's kind of the implication of the word shunyata in Sanskrit. Thich Nhat Hanh likes to point out that shunyata isn't nothing or nothingness, so emptiness might not be a good English translation for this word, that we could translate the word shunyata instead of emptiness, because emptiness kind of has the connotation of, nothing's there, voidness. But it isn't really voidness as much as it is, as I was saying, boundlessness, or even fullness, or wholeness. Because the balloon, which might look at a distance like it's full of this big, weighty, substantial stuff, is empty of such substantial stuff, but it is full of air. So the very emptiness of something is already, on the flip side, a fullness of something else. And we could say phenomena, in being empty, are empty of separation, substantiality, and thingness, but full of boundlessness, connection. We could say things are empty of weightlessness and difficulty and, the problematics of living. They're actually empty of that, but they're full, because they're empty of all that, they're full of flow and compassion. Things being empty of separation, thingness, weightfulness, difficulty, are empty in that they're free and without boundary. So, this is what prajna cognizes, and this really isn't a something, because the whole realm of somethings is the realm of difficulty and weightiness and troublesomeness and substantiality. So prajna is not really cognizing something, because there isn't anything there in the way that usually we cognize something that's separate. That is the nature of cognition, right? Is we're looking at something that's separate and analyzable. So I suppose you could say that prajna is more like, so it's not wisdom about something. I understand this. I have wisdom. I understand a concept, an object. So it's more like prajna is a felt sense of things being empty in the way that I've been describing things as being empty. So we were talking about this review. We talked about this last time. Then we were talking also about impermanence. And we were saying that actually this idea of emptiness that the HeartSutra stresses so much is really not that different from emptiness, actually from impermanence. It may be that emptiness is another way of talking about impermanence. Because impermanence, when you think about it, really is the same thing as emptiness. And maybe emptiness is just a more thoroughgoing or deeper description of impermanence. Because when you think about impermanence, impermanence also implies that there's really kind of nothing there that's substantial, weighty, and troublesome. Impermanence already implies that there's no separable thing. Because, think about it, conventionally when you hear something's impermanent, you think, oh, it's impermanent. Something is there, and then it goes away. It's impermanent. It's there, but it's impermanent because it disappears later on. Right? That's how conventionally one would think of impermanence. But if you look more closely at impermanence, there really can't be anything there at all, because if it's really impermanent, radically impermanent, at what point would you say it's actually here and then later it's impermanent? We might think, now it's here, now it's gone. But if you look at the moment when it's here, even at that moment it's impermanent, so it's practically already gone. It's like life, right? We're here, but we're also in the same moment gone, because this moment is gone, right? So we're impermanent, but not because we die later on. We're impermanent because every moment of time is passing. So there's no moment of time that you could actually find as being substantial, even though we have the illusion that it's so. So you see, emptiness and impermanence are pretty much the same thing. Everything is always gone or going. Nothing is arriving at the state of being here. So nothing is actually graspable, findable, or haveable, which is the great source of human frustration, right? Because we're always looking for that which is graspable, havable, and the more subtle we are with what's really going on with us, the more we admit, gee, I don't really have that thing which I want so much. I'm looking for something that I don't have. But the fact is, there's nothing that can be had, because everything is gone, even as it appears. It's empty of that which we're desiring it to be, and full of that which it actually is, which we don't see, and we don't have any idea about what it is. So, in short, this is a little complicated, I suppose, and in short, one could say that emptiness kind of does defy our capacity to conceptualize things. I mean, that's kind of what we're saying here. So, although we can think about emptiness, and we can master a kind of logic of emptiness, because there is a sort of logic of emptiness. Actually, to know emptiness, as it really is to somehow go beyond the conceptualizing capacity. In Tibetan Buddhism, they study the logic of emptiness extensively, especially in the Gelugpa school. And maybe if we get around to it, we'll study also some texts on the logic of emptiness. And even though they spend 20 years on this study of the logic of emptiness, and they think it's very important, even in Tibetan Buddhism they say this study is only preparation for the actual living of emptiness. It just kind of softens the ground so that you can live emptiness. And in Zen, the method is not to study the logic of emptiness extensively, just a little bit, we're 5 weeks worth of the logic of emptiness, because we Zen students can barely take 5 weeks worth of this, let alone 20 years. And instead, in Zen, the focus is on lived experience that we're paying attention to with a great deal of focus, in the hope that this ripens into a real feeling for emptiness over time, rather than discussing and analyzing. Then, another thing we talked about was compassion, and the relationship of compassion to the teachings of emptiness, and the idea of a bodhisattva, because Avalokiteshvara, bodhisattva, are the first 2 words of the sutra. And we were saying that compassion is the inescapable implication of impermanence and emptiness, which seems like, at first, very counterintuitive. Why would compassion be the inescapable implication of impermanence and emptiness? One would think almost it would be the opposite. It would, really seeing that things were impermanent and empty would sort of chase away any thought you might have of compassion. But actually it's the opposite of that. It gives rise to compassion. Compassion is inescapable when you really see the emptiness and impermanence of phenomena. Because things are inseparable, completely bound up with each other, no boundaries between them, that everything is connection. It's connection without anything that's being connected. It's just connection. It's nothing but connection. That's what emptiness really means, that there's nothing but connection at all points, without points. So of course, the implications of this vision of reality as connection is compassion, right? It's often given, in the teachings of emptiness, this metaphor of the body, the single body, and the idea of, I've used this before. I'm sure you've heard me mention this. It's kind of such a beautiful metaphor. You're walking down a path in the woods and you step on a thorn. You get a thorn in your foot. Ouch! Your foot hurts. So the foot says to the hand, would you please take the thorn out? The hand says, well, I'll think about it. I'm not feeling that compassionate today. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Depends on how compassionate I'm feeling. If I'm compassionate, I'll take the thorn out. Well, this is an absurdity, right? Because the hand doesn't have to be compassionate toward the foot to take the thorn out. The hand recognizes, your hand knows that if you get a thorn in your foot, you better pull the thorn out, because the hand and the thorn and the foot are the same body. It doesn't take an extra added compassion to do something that's very natural. When there's a pain in the body, the hand will go and take that thorn out without needing to, be compassionate. It's just a natural reflex of one body taking care of itself, naturally. Well, reality is one body, completely connected, just like our body is one thing. So there's no need to have extra, affection for another when there are no others. So compassion, so if emptiness is connection, compassion is a natural outgrowth of that, a natural flow from that. Not to be compassionate would be to sort of misunderstand the fundamental nature of the real. So compassion then, in light of the emptiness teachings, turns out not to be a special feeling that we have, an emotional feeling of pity and affection. It's just a recognition and a merging with the flow of reality, which is why we feel the human emotions of sympathy and love, because we know this on some level. Avalokiteshvara is the bodhisattva of compassion, and that's why, even though there's a bodhisattva of prajna, it's the bodhisattva of compassion and not the bodhisattva of prajna who is the speaker in this sutra. We talked a little bit also about bodhisattvas as being those practitioners who understand that since emptiness is nothing but connection, there would be no way to be awakened without all of reality being awakened, without all others being awakened. Right? How could I be awakened apart from everyone? So bodhisattvas, knowing this, are constantly working for the benefit and the awakening of others without paying much heed for their own awakening. They're only concerned for others, so they're compassionate, enthusiastic, and they have this quality of being willing to work endlessly for a goal which is impossibly off into the future. Kind of a wonderful naivete, a kind of beautiful, energetic, ongoing enthusiasm to just keep working for the benefit of others, knowing that there is no other way to live. It would be impossible to live in any other way. It's kind of a beautiful vision of what a person could be. So that's what I was talking about last time, those points. So the first words of the sutra are Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva, when practicing deeply the prajna paramita, perceived that all 5 skandhas in their own being are empty and was saved from all suffering. That's the first great sentence of the HeartSutra. We probably don't need any more sentences after that. That's probably enough right there. So Avalokiteshvara was practicing the prajna paramita, the perfection of this faculty that cognizes emptiness. So this is already very important information, that the faculty of prajna is to be practiced. That it's not an achievement, but it is an ongoing practice. It's very telling that it says here Avalokiteshvara was practicing deeply the prajna paramita. The Dogen in our tradition, Dogen is very famous for his deep thought that there is no enlightenment toward which we're practicing. That the practice itself and the enlightenment are identical, and they arise simultaneously. And this is really the same kind of thought. Avalokiteshvara is going to proceed in the rest of this sutra to set forth the deepest understanding of emptiness, and it comes out of his ongoing practice of emptiness. So the first thing that Avalokiteshvara notices in this practice is that all 5 skandhas in their own being are empty. So then we have to discuss what is 5 skandhas, what is own being. Empty, we've already discussed, and we will continue to discuss it over and over again, but what is the 5 skandhas and what is emptiness? Well, in a minute, if we get that far, we'll go over the skandhas in more detail, but for now, just to note that basically 5 skandhas means the world as we know it, inside and outside. Subjective world and objective world as one experience. Implied in the whole idea of skandhas is the fact that the world out there is pretty much irrelevant, except insofar as we experience it through our sense organs and, consciousness. In other words, we don't know what the world, we couldn't possibly know what the world is, or even that there is a world. All we know is this is what the world is to us. So there's no effort in the 5 skandhas to say anything at all about the world other than the place where we meet the world. It's kind of an interesting idea that the early Buddhists had this thought that we don't know what's going on out there, but it's not important, because all we can ever know is what we experience. So let's look at our experience and let's consider the world as a function of our experience. So that's basically what the skandhas are. In other words, the only world that there ever is for any creature is a world that's dynamic and co-created by ourselves and whatever is outside of us. It's a kind of a powerful thought. We might think the world is kind of just laying there, out to get us or something, and not admit the fact that the only world we will ever know is the one that we are participating in creating. So that's what the 5 skandhas are. The negotiation, a map of the negotiation, the creation that's going on all the time, right in between the place where the perceptual organs and thinking and consciousness meet objects in the world. So own being, what does that mean? There's a long debate in Buddhist philosophy whether anything at all has any own being. The own being defined as a separate, real, substantial existence apart from any other existence. And the debate on this point went on for centuries through many detailed texts. Now, in the sutras, early sutras, the Buddha taught for sure that what we call a self or a person does not have any own being. What we conventionally know as, ourselves or another person doesn't have any actual own being. The self or a person, ourselves, of course we have an experience of being a person and a self. It's not that that experience is an illusion. We have an experience of that, but we mistakenly define that experience as a separate, independently existing, own being entity. So we take an experience that's actually there and we impute a meaning onto it that it doesn't really have. So the Buddha said, it was pretty clear that the Buddha was saying the self, the person, has no own being. The self, the person, is a tentative experience which is contingent on many things. perceptions, feelings, thoughts, history, all these things arise together, and we call that myself. So these things do arise, but we just make a mistake to cohere it as much as we think it coheres. It has no own being. So in order for people to get this point, because, and why is that important? It's important because the Buddha thought that the reason why we're suffering is because we're creating this concept of selfness, and then we're all mad at somebody who insults it, or diminishes it somehow, and we fight with them, or we fight with ourselves. We think our self is not good enough, or something or other. So a lot of suffering comes from this concept. So the Buddha was trying to relieve suffering, so he's pointed out, well, no, actually, the concept is misplaced. Why don't you stop thinking about it in that way and recognize that it's just this stuff coming up. And in order to help you recognize that it's the stuff coming up, let's make different categories of stuff. Then you can have a good way of analyzing the stuff that comes up. And once you see that the stuff is just stuff coming up in various categories, you'll be disabused of the notion that there's a substantial own being there. So people, that's what the 5 skandhas are, 5 categories of analysis to look at experience other than, is this good for me? Is this bad for me? So the early Buddhists did that, but then they said, well, okay, the person has no own being, but do the skandhas have own being? So then they said, no, the skandhas don't have own being either. Well, then what are they made up of? Well, they're made up of smaller units of experience, different kinds of dharmas. That was the word used, dharmas. So then somebody said, well, now what about the dharmas? Do they have any own being? And some people said, yeah, they do. And other people said, no, they don't. And they went back and forth about this. And you can see why somebody would not want to say there's no own being anywhere. Because then it would seem like everything was up for grabs, it's just too fluid. We'd have anarchy, Why would we believe in the Buddhist teachings if nothing had any own being, including the Buddhist teachings? So there's a lot of resistance to taking this all the way toward nothing has any own being. There is the self doesn't have any own being. Maybe the 5 skandhas don't have any own being, but there's somewhere in there. There's got to be some own being. Otherwise, what are we talking about? That was kind of what they ended up saying. But here comes Avalokiteshvara, and she says so. All 5 skandhas in their own being, and everything that you want to say is in them. It's all empty. Absolutely all of it is empty. None of it has any separate, concrete, substantial existence at all. It's all only connection. It's all only flow. It's all only movement with nothing that is moving. Nothing fixed and substantial. The balloon has nothing in it. So everything we know and experience, we do experience. It's not that, we're in space and there's nothing going on, or we'll wake up and this is all a dream. It's all happening, but it just isn't the way it seems. Often the analogy is given of seeing a rope coiled up on the path. And you look at the rope, and you see it, and the rope, and you think, ouch, it's a snake, I'm running away. But it's not a snake, it's a rope. So something was there. It's just that you completely misunderstood what it was. And that's the story with human experience. Something is there, but it's empty, and we don't know that. So it's very much like the rope. We're running away, from this harmless rope, and in our running away, tripping, falling, cutting ourselves. The police are coming, all kinds of things are happening because we're running away from something that we are mistaken as to its nature. So the world is empty of its appearance and full of something else. It's full of inconceivability, freedom, and beauty. Since Avalokiteshvara, because of her practice of Prajnaparamita, sees the actual nature of the world, she is naturally free from suffering. What would be more obvious than seeing the world as it is you're free from suffering, because the suffering is caused by mistaking the world for something that it's not, and then all the time being dissatisfied because it's not what it seems to be. So Avalokiteshvara does not need to do the laborious work of purification and many practices and studies, etc., that previously was done. She doesn't need to develop all positive qualities and work on her emotions and so on, etc., because practicing the empty nature of phenomena, she's already free of defilements, and she spontaneously manifests all good qualities without having to make a special effort to laboriously cultivate them, as seemed to be the case in earlier Buddhism. When there's some Om being, you got to do something about it and make Om being that's good and get rid of Om being that's bad, and so on. But if there's no Om being, then the mistaken sense of what things are is the cause of all the defilements and the blocking of all the positive qualities. So Avalokiteshvara is practicing this, seeing the world as empty, boundless, perfect. Unfortunately for us, we are not seeing the world in that way. We're seeing the world as non-empty. We're convinced that the world is, that snake is really a snake. Things are substantial. They get in our way. We stub our toe. We want to get rid of them and move them out of the way, and we're scheming, figuring out how to do that. One thing really is different from another. One thing really is separate from another. Things are not empty. We know this. We feel this. Otherwise, why in the world would we fear death and illness? Why in the world would we ever have desires that we are attached to? Why would we want to win and not lose? Why would we think that the unhappiness of others doesn't matter to us, or that the happiness of others is not our happiness, if we didn't think that the world was not empty? If we saw that the world was empty, these things would not be the way we looked at the world. So, the reason why Avalokiteshvara is relieved from all suffering when she practices emptiness is because that's the whole reason for all human problems, comes from this conviction that we have at the bottom of our souls, that we are not the world and the world is not us. We're convinced of the fact that we're standing over against the world, and so there's a big problem there. This is, we can think our way into recognizing that this is not so. We all know the drill about scientific analysis of the material world. The material world seems to be, to the naked eye, substantial, and we live as if it were, but we all know that actually it's not substantial, that matter consists mostly of space. The more you try to find something in that space that's substantial, the more clear it becomes that you can't find anything that's substantial. Quarks disappear under your gaze. It seems as if the analysis of physical matter shows that the world is there because we're there. And the world seems to disappear or become uncanny once we stop looking. And it's a strange thing, but that's what quantum physics seems to be saying. So, emptiness is, that's one of the reasons why I think Buddhism and the doctrine of emptiness is so popular, because it accords so well with scientific insight. And it's the same thing with regard to our subjective experience. We all know that although we experience a feeling of being a separate person, that it's not really so. What would that separate person be if there was no parents, if there was no food, if there was no culture, if there was no language, friends, studies, thoughts, experiences, events, what would one be? Who would the person be? Could you tease the person out of all that? So what we call myself is a focal point, a shape in air around which, for each one of us, this unique set of ever-changing influences coalesces. It's as if, you can imagine a figure in ground, like all this stuff comes to this point and it makes an outline, but there's nothing there. It's just this outline that's being made by all of our experience and all of the life around us. And so it certainly looks like a shape, but it's a shape that's made by everything else, with just like the balloon, with nothing inside of it. So yes, this is easy to understand, that the world of matter and the world of subjectivity are empty of separation or solidity. And once you practice this, not just think it, but once you integrate it as a spiritual practice, a whole way of living, deeply and thoroughly, then you're saved from suffering. So this is, in a way, a kind of rewriting of Buddha's first statement of Buddha's Noble Truths, where he says, suffering, cause of suffering, end of suffering, path. The cause of suffering is desire. And here, the cause of suffering is ignorance about the state of reality, thinking that reality is non-empty when it's really empty. That's the cause of suffering. Therefore, as soon as we see reality's nature, suffering is ended. I think that in actual practice, this is not like some aha moment of seeing emptiness. There may be many such aha moments, but the main point, I think, is that this is a cultivation over time. Last time I talked about three kinds of prajna. The prajna that comes from hearing and teachings and studying, like taking this class. The prajna that comes from your own reflections and thoughts about the empty nature of things. And then the prajna that comes from a deep turning, inside, an experiential turning inside that comes from seeing emptiness. We need to practice all three of these things regularly, over time, like polishing a jewel, rubbing it again and again with different kinds of cloth till it shines beautifully. And a jewel can always shine still more when you keep rubbing. So as we go on living our lives and studying our troubles and our sufferings, this is really important. I think our troubles and our sufferings are the most instructive study of all. Studying them and seeing how true this is, seeing how the direct relationship between our thinking that the world and ourselves is substantial and separate, and how that directly produces a moment of suffering. One can study this, and the more one sees this over and over and over again, and sees the many ways in which we do this, and how deeply held these views are, the more we train ourselves in seeing, living, feeling the empty nature of phenomenon. And then little by little we have more confidence in this, and we begin to really live and see in this way, and to become less fooled and caught and tied up in knots by our habitual notions, which we have taken to be absolutely reality to now. This confidence in the empty nature of things, and I even hate using that word, because it sounds so conceptual, but it is not conceptual. It's a felt feeling, about living. The more we have confidence in that feeling about living, eventually that confidence is stronger than the deeply ingrained habit we have of seeing it otherwise. And the more that happens, the more there's a lifting, little by little, a lifting of our burden, and a more lightness in our living. And then it becomes possible even to feel ease and joy even when things are really tough. Even if we have various kinds of mental sufferings, we can still feel ease and joy when we remember the cause of those sufferings and the process by which they arise. It takes the edge off, you know. It makes things much lighter. If things are empty, they're not weighty, they're not substantially difficult, they're seemingly difficult. So it's one thing to say, you know, I'm feeling that things are seemingly difficult. They seem to be difficult. I seem to be having some difficulty, but it's another thing to say things are really weighing me down. It's overwhelming. Do you see what I'm saying? It's a different story. O Shariputra, she says, form does not differ from emptiness, and emptiness does not differ from form. That which is form is emptiness, and that which is emptiness, form. The same is true of feelings, perceptions, formations, and consciousness. So now, this is a beginning of a quotation. The rest of the sutra is a quotation, which is spoken by Avalokiteshvara. And whoops, somebody else was there. We didn't know that. It turns out that Shariputra was standing nearby while all this is going on. And so while she's practicing the Prajnaparamita, she turns to Shariputra and starts talking to him. So then, who is Shariputra? So, Avalokiteshvara, we learned, is the Bodhisattva of compassion. So who is this Shariputra? Nothing in this sutra is so short. Obviously, there's not a word in here that's casual or by accident. There's a big point to every word. So then we've got to figure out who is Shariputra. And it's a little bit embarrassing, actually, because the Mahayana Sutras and the Emptiness Sutras are slightly satirical. They're slightly satirical. They kind of are making fun of all these old guys who were going around analyzing all the dharmas and carting around this big load of own being wherever they went, you know. And it was all a little laborious, and aren't they silly to do that when everything is actually empty of own being, and the own being that they're carting around and seems so heavy is actually light as a feather, and isn't that silly? And so there's a kind of critique and a ridiculing, actually, of these poor guys, of whom Shariputra is one, and the leading one of all. Shariputra sort of represents the tradition of the laborious analysis and mental cultivation of dharmas that seem to have a big load of own being on them. Shariputra is the expert of Abhidharma. And the HeartSutra is a kind of light-hearted romp through the entire Abhidharma. So Shariputra is the fall guy. And it's a little embarrassing because, we live in a very different Buddhist universe than the Buddhist universe that existed at the time these texts were written, when it was to some extent sectarian. So there was a kind of argument. You guys are wrong. You guys are missing the boat. You're silly and dumb. And here's the real story. It's embarrassing nowadays when you recite the HeartSutra in front of your Theravada friends, and you're a little sorry. It's not so noticeable here, really, because this is all by implication. It just says Shariputra, and then we have this whole thing. By implication, you know this. But in some of the other sutras, it's really pretty explicit. It's in the longer Prajnaparamita sutras. Nowadays, we live in a world in which Mahayana and Theravada and Zen and Tibetan all exist in the same world. In earlier times, the different groups with different viewpoints often were living geographically very far away, and the farther away you are and the less contact there is, the easier it is to think ill of someone else. Have you noticed this in your own life? If you don't see someone for a while, they become far less nice people. When you see them, they're not so bad after all. But when they're far away, you begin thinking about them, and they become less appealing in your mind. They become more the other, right? The further away they are, the less you see them. So nowadays in the Buddhist world there's so much contact among the various kinds of Buddhism, not even in Asia, let alone here in California, where not only are there contact among the various kinds of Buddhists, but individuals are themselves various kinds of Buddhists. You know, so therefore, to ridicule one kind of Buddhism it seems rather beside the point and silly. So I shouldn't have told you that. You probably might not have known that if I didn't point it out in the sutra. So that's why Shariputra is mentioned, and that's why the whole sutra is addressed to him, because Avalokiteshvara is trying to straighten him out and show him that, you know, you don't have to think the way you've been thinking all this time. It's all different from that. In Buddhist psychology, as I said, there's holding on to at least a shred of own being. Somewhere there must be a little piece of own being. No, sorry, there is none anywhere. So the last point is, now here we come to the naming of the five skandhas, the detail of the five skandhas. Form, they're mentioned here. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness is no other than form. Form just happens to be the first of the five skandhas. But it's just as true for feelings, perceptions, formations, and consciousness as it is for form. All these are empty. So those are the five skandhas: form, feelings, perceptions, and consciousness. The whole world, all of our experience, can be neatly categorized into these five heaps. It's either a form or a feeling or a perception or a consciousness, and there's no other possibility. That was the analysis. And it's a practice. You could actually practice viewing your own experience in terms of form, feelings, perceptions, and consciousness, instead of in terms of me and whether I like it or not.
Five skandhas, four forms.
Formations.
Oh.
Did I leave that? Oh, I'm sorry. I left that. Yeah. Form, feelings, perceptions, formations, or samskaras, and consciousness. There are five. I'm sorry. So I'll very briefly define these five, and then I'll be done. Form. You know, this is the most interesting thing. Do you know what the definition of form is in this text? The definition of form is that which can be molested. That is the definition of form. Molested in the sense of pushed out of shape somehow. Because, think about it, you can't take a feeling and break it or bend it, right? A feeling cannot be grabbed hold of and pushed out of shape. A feeling is itself, and it can't be grabbed. I mean, it just comes and goes. It's quicksilver, right? It's not a thing. The same thing with a perception, a formation, and I'll mention what that is in a minute, and consciousness. But stuff in the world, form, you can take a hammer and break it, you can push it and bend it, it can be bent, it can be broken. So that's the nature, that's the definition of form. Isn't that interesting? The definition of material stuff is that, which includes especially the body. That's the sort of number one thing in the realm of form, is the body. Certainly for us, that's true, right? So that which can be molested, that which can be broken or bent, changed, grasped. So that's form. Feelings, we talked about this when we studied the Mindfulness Sutra. There's three kinds of feeling. Feelings are these deep, unconscious gut reactions that we have as soon as there's cognition of anything, whether inside or outside. There's a gut reaction coming from past conditioning. Positive, negative, neutral. In other words, I want this, I want more of it, I want it to stay. I hate this, I want it to go away, or I'm neutral. And those feelings condition what happens next. We perceive the object, we name it. We say, oh, it's so-and-so, it's a person, it's a man, it's a woman, it's whoever. That's a perception, which is a fairly complicated operation, based on a form, an organ, meeting a form, a feeling arising, and then a kind of interpretation. So a perception is a kind of interpretation. And then, once we make that interpretation, the next one is formations, or samskaras in Sanskrit, which means then we want to do something with that. We put it together into our sort of theory of life, our theory of our personality, what we think we like and don't like, and then we have all kinds of feelings and impulses and actions around that. Strategies for dealing with it that are added on top of the identification of what something is. And then the consciousness is the field of awareness in which all this is happening. So according to the Abhidharmists and the early Buddhists, this was what a personality is the endless flow of those 5 kinds of experiences. And it was the arising and passing away on moment after moment of a whole concatenation of these experiences, which we fail to see in their complexity, and we just say, it's me, I don't like her, so I'm going to insult her or be mean to her now. But that's not what's going on. What's going on is form, recognition, feeling, perception, formation of impulses and so forth in the field of awareness. The more we look at our experience like that and get off of, there she is, I don't like her, I'm going to be mean to her, then our whole way of looking and experiencing our lives will change. And now we're told in the sutra that even those experiences are empty of own being. They're not what they seem to be. In early Buddhism, the goal was nirvana, peace. Finally letting go and finding peace. And after all, nirvana too is a kind of emptiness. The idea was that the skandhas somehow had a shred of own being to them that we were somehow going to eliminate through our practice and finally enter nirvana, where there would be no more shred of own being. So we were on this laborious path of transformation and accumulation of virtues and, dissolving or abandoning of non-virtues. But the fact that all these things to begin with are empty tells us that no laborious transformation is necessary. Since the nature of all dharmas is already empty, everything is already nirvana. So you can see again why this would be resisted, this viewpoint. Because then somebody would say, well, I'm out of business then. Right? I'm in the business of sort of working all this out and helping other people do that, and you're telling me it's already done? I can't accept that. Well, it's not that it is already done, but it's not that these other things are then unnecessary. Maybe you still do these cultivations. Maybe you still practice meditation and so forth. But what's different is the attitude you have about it. You could see that you'd have a much more light-hearted, easygoing spirit in your cultivations, right? If you recognize to begin with, well, it's only because I'm such a big boob that I don't get it. That everything is already fine. I guess I have to go through all this, but actually, it's okay anyway. That's a very different thing from, oh God, I'm so bad, and I'm trudging onward toward goodness. It's a lot of work. It's a very different feeling, about the process of spiritual practice when you sort of start out with the good news that Avalokiteshvara is here telling us. So then, just as Dogen says, your practice becomes itself the unfolding of enlightenment. Instead of this trudge from, ignorance to enlightenment, it's just the unfolding of enlightenment. It's a delight. It's a joy, even if it's hard work. So the attitude, the spirit, is totally different, even if, to the outward eye, the practice might even be precisely the same. After all, even though we're big emptiness fans, we study the Mindfulness Sutra too, and we talk about cultivation and positive dharmas and negative dharmas just the same way that Shariputra does, except our attitude is different. We know that it's all an illusion anyway. It's all empty anyway. Still though, what else is there to do? So, what I was thinking of, this is kind of subtle stuff. And I don't know if this is possible to have this conversation, but I'm going to put it to you. You're pretty smart people and creative people.
Or obedient.
Obedient. I don't know how obedient you are. No, I think, see if it's possible to talk about, as, kind of going as deeply as you can with this, how your feeling of being a subject, being a person, and what that means to you, is changing in the process of your practicing. In other words, here's how I used to view myself, my subjectivity, myself as a person. Here's how I'm looking at it now. Here's how it's changing. Maybe that's too hard of a thing to talk about. If it is, you can talk about anything else that arises in relation to this material.
It won't be about myself anyway.
Yeah. So that's what I thought of anyway, on short notice.